It's unnerving. I don't know if anyone's there.
No, I can see 40. It's climbing.
Oh. Hello, people who are there.
I know, 65 are up to. Just going to wait till that number just sort of slows down a little bit.
There's a chat window. Hey, Dan. Who's just put something in the chat? Say good morning to everyone who's arrived.
Yeah, good morning, everyone.
Hello to the people down at Monash.
Yeah, no, hi, Margaret. Long time. Good to hear from you.
It's a little cold in here. I was going to wear my Newcastle University hoodie just to, you know, flex.
Just to be controversial. As you are.
I don't think University of Newcastle is the most controversial.
Hi, Zoya. Good to see you. All these people.
I think we probably get ready.
Yeah, I think so. Let's jump in. Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for attending our very first inaugural Academy webinar. This is something that we're wanting to do a lot more of into the future, so we're really glad that you can be here today. My name's Sarah Rose. I'm the General Manager of Academy here at Elaborate, and I'm really pleased to be partnering here with Scrum.org as well. Eric, who's on the line, Eric and I started talking about this back in I think it was late last year in December, and then finally we got around to 2020 and we had a few other things thrown in the way, but finally we are here. So I'm really pleased to introduce our speaker today. So I have Lachlan Heasman, and Lachlan is a co-author of a book called A Scrum Book, The Spirit of the Game, and he's worked in the Australian software industry for over 20 years, many different sectors and roles, and he's been working with Elaborate quite closely as a trainer over the last few years. He actually trains our Scrum courses, so we're really glad to have him here today to speak to us on the techniques for advanced Scrum Mastery, moving from specific practices to working with principles. We also have Eric, the Vice President of Marketing and Ops at Scrum.org, and he is also a co-author of UML for Database Design and UML for Mere Mortal, and has got a lot of experience as well as a director at IBM, and has worked with Scrum teams for a very long time. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome them both to take you through the session today. So over to you, Lachlan.
Well, thanks, Sarah. We've got a bunch of slides that we're going to take you through. I'm going to be doing most of the talking. Eric's going to be interjecting with words of wisdom and handling the Q&A that pops through as well. When we get to the end, we'll probably hang around for a while and we can answer a few more questions as well. So feel free to hang around and have a bit more of a chat. So you've got some information on Scrum.org, where Eric's from. I provide Scrum.org based training through the Elaborate Academy. Great bunch of people who deliver some fun immersive training in the agile world. Quickly covered who Eric is. We can see him there doing his awesome role, doing a bit of a catcher, which is what he's going to do today. I, on the other hand, have no sporting skills at all, so I don't get to do that. Let's get started. So we're going to talk about, when we're going to focus on the Scrum Master and how to act and behave in that role, because it's a tricky role. Scrum Master, you're responsible for promoting the Scrum, supporting Scrum, and you need to help people understand the theory, the practices, the rules, values of Scrum. But it's pretty easy to fall into some traps as a Scrum Master. When you fall into these, it's not very helpful for your teams. And what we're also giving you is a little sampler of some of the stuff that we cover in the Professional Scrum Master II training. Now, I'm just going to make it clear that I'm going to talk for a while here. And when I think about the PSM II course, there is very few periods where as the trainer, I'm just talking. It's not going to be kind of like this. We're going to cover some of the content, but not necessarily the way it's going to be delivered. And what we're going to talk about is ways you can be functional as a Scrum Master to help your organization. And looking at what we're calling techniques for Advanced Scrum Mastery, and hopefully you're going to get something useful out of it. And thanks for turning up this morning, particularly 6 a.m. in Kazakhstan. Welcome. You might remember before 2020, when you're a Scrum Master, it was a bit like this. We had a great time of running through fields of daisies, and everything was so much easier than it is now. We had teams that were, if not co-located, at least accessible to each other. You might have had teams in different cities or different centers, but you could go there, or you could bring the whole team together, that's pretty handy. That kind of communication, that getting to know each other, working face to face. So it was pretty good for communication and sharing ideas, getting help and collaborating. And as a Scrum Master, you might be working with one or more of these teams, but it was, we had the advantage that it was kind of easy to find opportunities to help the teams. Maybe we'd facilitate events, or find impediments to remove, the kind of stuff that you'd get out of your textbook Scrum Mastery. But that didn't mean that we weren't open to acting dysfunctionally as Scrum Masters. And this is a bunch of stereotypes that Barry Overeem's put together. But you've probably experienced them. You may have done them, and let's be open and confessing right now that I've certainly done, I think, all of these, with the possible exception of implementing Jira. As the Scrum Police, when you're the person who's running around waving the Scrum Guide at people, telling them that's not Scrum. You know, this is exactly how we should be doing things right now, because the Scrum Guide tells us we've got 10% of our time to do refinement, so we must use 10% of our time to do refinement, and we don't care about context or what your feelings are. This is what we do as the Scrum Police. Or maybe we're the team scribe, and you know, we've always got our little post-it notes and our Sharpies ready, and if anyone has a passing thought, we're scratching it down, making sure that everything's captured, and we then go and type it up in the wiki and share links with everybody. And there's no risk that anything's ever forgotten. Or you could perhaps be the secretary of the team who's making sure all the meeting rooms were booked and it's in everyone's calendars, and you picking up all the stragglers to make sure we get to the daily scrum on time, and keeping everything super organized. But there's lots of different ways that we can behave, and when we take on these kind of stereotypes, there's some bits of them that are okay. As Scrum Master, we want to use the Scrum Guide as a guide to doing Scrum. It's got the rules in there. But if we get overzealous of that and become the police, it's going to start causing problems. If we're doing everything for our teams, then they're never going to take ownership of what they're doing. If we take on a situation like the chairman or the team boss stereotype, we're actually being in charge of what's going on and stopping people from flourishing. So these kind of dysfunctional stereotypes can occur quite easily. But things have changed, right? So now we're the Scrum Masters of 2020, and this little thing has certainly had a big impact on our lives. Well, I'm making a pretty safe assumption, I think, that it's impacted everybody across the globe. So we're no longer co-located, right? So we're not sitting in the office. I can't see the chatter reaction, but I wonder, is anyone actually back in the office now, or is everyone still working from home? Yeah, no, not in Melbourne, quite obviously. Sorry about that for those of you who are in Melbourne.
It's like almost everybody still work from home. Some mixes.
Yeah.
Still at home. Someone's back full time in Brisbane.
In Brisbane, right. special part of the world, Queensland. Back in the office in Auckland. Yeah, it's functional government. Well, this is being recorded. Maybe I shouldn't say that. Too late now. Yeah, working from home. Lots of working from home.
And based on everything that certainly that we're seeing, and this is going to be fluid for quite some time. And I think they'll be back to home, back to the office, and things will continue to change and evolve probably over the next 6 to 12 months, causing this change in how we support our teams, how we work together as teams, and certainly how we communicate.
But can we fall into the dysfunctions that we've seen before? I kind of think we can. I think it's possible, though probably not quite the same dysfunctions. We could still be the team boss. People could still be reporting to us as the hiring, the firing. Maybe we're still the team hero as the Scrum Master. We're still making sure that we can do more every single sprint, and we're amazing. There's no impediments because as the hero, you've solved them before anyone spotted them. Maybe you're still trying to be the team scribe. Maybe you're the Jira guru because now our digital tools are even more important than they were beforehand. So that's your day as the Scrum Master, is making sure the workflows are just right. I hope it's not, but it could be. I think it's possible to still fall into these traps, even when you're working from home or separated. So that's kind of what I put this in here. I think it's funny. If anyone has training with me will find that I make lots of jokes about Jira, most of which are completely unfair, but that's my way. So how can we be Scrum Masters across these different situations? So before COVID, post-COVID, when things start to recover, which we can hope they are, those of you who, Brisbane and Auckland were saying that they were working in the office, Jakarta in Brazil, I suspect you're not. Certainly not in Melbourne. And this is the crux of what we're talking about. So we want you to focus on principles as a Scrum Master. We want you to think about what are some of the principles that we can build from as a Scrum Master and control and guide our behaviors and our working with our teams, rather than what are specific practices. So as an example, specific practice is the 3-question implementation of the daily Scrum, which if you look at the Scrum Guide over the years, that's starting to get pared back as a way to run a daily Scrum. Now, there's lots of principles that we could start from to guide us in Scrum. So we could talk about Scrum values, for example, or we could talk about self-organization. We've picked 2 in the interests of not holding you into a video conference for 5 hours. And we're going to briefly talk about empiricism. I'm going to briefly talk about servant leadership. And we did this with a complete bias that I'm particularly interested in both of these. I think fundamentally Scrum's process is an empirical process, and it's very important to understand what that means and how that works. And I also think that we talk about the Scrum Master being a servant leader. It's hard to understand how to be a servant leader. We're used to, certainly in Australia, the idea of what it means to lead is very much a controlling position and a powerful position, what we would call vertical leadership. So think of the organizational structure with one person up here and a whole lot of people reporting to them. That's how we would generally conceptualize leadership. But servant leadership doesn't work like that. It's a different way of thinking about leadership. So I want to think about these 2 things. I'm going to chuck a whole lot of stuff at you on that, and we can probably deal with some questions on the way through. So let's have a chat about empiricism. So maybe you thought this was going to be 2020. So for those of us in Australia, the first quarter of this year, particularly those of us on the East Coast, it's going to recover from bushfire. That's what we're going to spend our time doing. Some of you may not remember last summer in Australia where we spent every day watching people tell us what was on fire and which town was in trouble and that kind of thing. But so maybe in the first quarter, we're going to grow some sales. We're going to take over some white space. I'm not sure what that is, but we're going to get it. We'll create some new features. We'll fix some of our bugs that we put in last year before the Christmas shutdown. We'll finish our agile transformation, and Q1 is going to set us up really nicely to sail into the end of the financial year in Q2, where we extend our sales and get some more white space to take over, begin our digital transformation, because you've got to be transforming all the time. We'll create some more features, rebrand for our new financial year. Then you'll be starting the financial year strong in Q3. So we're going to develop our sales pipeline, open some new offices, finish our digital transformation before we get to Q4, where we'll learn how to actually make some useful OKRs, because all these are awful examples of OKRs. Maybe we'll have a Christmas party, because that's what we do in Australia, have a code freeze, have an end of year shutdown. And that's what we intended to do. We lay it all out. We know how 2020 is going to roll, and it's going to be fantastic. Except the nasty reality set in. So we make a good start to the year. I remember the beginning of this year doing face-to-face training. I was in Melbourne at the University of Melbourne talking to people in March, and they were trying to work out which teams were going to be allowed at work which day, because they were doing this partial lockdown thing. But January and February, things were looking a bit shaky and started to get gloomy. Then in the second quarter, we need to maintain cash flow, and we all need to learn how to work from home. It feels, I don't know, maybe you hope you've got ready, used to that now. It took me a good 6 weeks to work out how to work from home, particularly when the homeschooling was going on as well. And then it just kept on going, right? So we have these little upticks. We have second waves coming through. We've had it in Australia. They're having it in Europe. I think the US is still dealing with their first wave. And there's nothing that between what we thought we were going to do, all these bright ideas, and the nasty reality that hit us. These two things are just not working particularly well together. So, I clicked that, sorry. So, if you didn't have these kind of things on your plan for 2020, global pandemic, 6 months lockdown, record recession, you may need to change how you plan. I'm just chucking it out there. If that's not on your, wasn't on your 4 or 5 year strategy, then why wasn't it on your long-term strategy? What's going on? Now, if you argue that you couldn't have predicted COVID-19, so no one would have it on their plans, then I think there's a problem with your approach to planning in general. If you can't find something that's going to pop up, which is such a massive event, multiple generation event, maybe it's once in a lifetime, once in 2 lifetime events. So why do you make plans if you can't predict something that's so important and so impactful? I guess the converse would also be true, that if you could predict it, then why would you bother writing it down? If the future was so certain, then plans would kind of get in your way anyway. It'd be just a waste of time. Just get on with it. You know what's happening next. And that's where I want to make the contrast between this idea of planning and empiricism. But what is a plan? Let's answer that question. A lot of people say, don't look at Wikipedia, it's full of dodgy stuff. But honestly, there's a lot of people in there who write some sentences that are just really clear. And I like this definition of a plan. It's a commonly understood as a set of temporal set of intended actions through which one expects to achieve a goal. That's just really quite neat. I'd love to be able to write that succinctly, but I don't have thousands of editors cleaning up after me. So a plan is a collection of intentions. Unfortunately, from an empirical perspective, that's all it is. It's like a list. It's a stack of things to do. It's not any more than that. It provides you no certainty of action or outcome. It is what you think you might do in the future. So empirically, all you have is this thing called a plan. But if you decide that it is a certainty, that it is a commitment to a future reality, then you've probably got a bit of a problem with that. And I think this is one of the cruxes of Agile and Scrum, is this use of empiricism to say, well, what we have is this thing that we can touch, we can feel, we can poke. That's reality. People start to confuse the ideas of intentions as a reality, even though it's not something you're going to do for 2 weeks. You don't know what's going to be happening in 2 weeks. It's just an intention.
And I think, Lachlan, as we think through this, I've had these conversations with folks. As a matter of fact, actually in Sydney, I think it's 2 years ago, I did a talk at Agile Australia titled "There's no planning in Scrum," because there's this myth that there's no planning in Scrum. We're always planning. We just are also expecting that we're going to learn that empiricism, and based on what we learn, we're going to replan. We're going to document. We're going to do these thought process of accepting reality and dealing with the complexity. So we're going to continue to replan based on what we learn as we go forward. If I think back 20 or so years in my career, there were many meetings where we said, well, this is what we plan to deliver, so we're going to deliver it in 12 months. And 6 months later, we're still planning to deliver that in 6 months, because that's what we planned to do. Even though the world had changed, activities had changed, we learned things from our customers, but we had this plan. And it's really, we're thinking in an empirical way of continuing to evolve our learning as we go, and continuing to plan. We're still planning in Scrum. We're just revisiting those plans very frequently.
Yeah, and my job as a project manager 15 years ago or so was to make sure that reality matched the plan that we had signed off on. So as we planned this, we kind of started going this way. My job was to bring everything back to here, ignoring the difference or the impact that was having, or what we should learn from over here. This is what we said we would do. So we'll be working this weekend because we need to get back on this plan. Or we'll need to find ways of cutting time somewhere else. So yes, I didn't want to say that plans are bad. I just think we need to understand what they truly are, rather than
exactly.
So if we are after some empirical certainty, because a plan is not certainty, it's a list of intentions. We have a simple thing in Scrum, which is done, and it was probably the biggest attractor for me in Scrum as a project manager at the time is if we are done, then there's so much less for me to deal with. I know what works and what doesn't work, and this is fundamental to Scrum, and the empirical nature of Scrum is to be done. Because when I'm done, and this is my definition of done, when people say, Lachlan, what's the definition of done? That there's no more known work to do. That's it. Whatever it is I'm working on, if there's nothing else I can do, if the thing is in a state for which it's intended to be used, then I can use it. I don't know if there's anything else to do with it. And that's a very useful place to be. It lets me know exactly where I am. So it lets me know how much I've spent to get to that point. I can give it to a customer and they will tell me what they think of it, not what they might think of it if it was complete, but what it actually does for them. If it's for me, I can actually use this thing as intended and find out whether my ideas on how it should work were right or wrong. So I'm not imagining that I'll know where I'm going to be in 6 months. I'm focusing on knowing exactly where I am. It's a very useful navigational tool to deal with things like budgets and delivery and scope and those kind of things, but also as a way to create some kind of certainty. I've always found it very powerful. Anyway, I think, well, why are we talking about this? It feels quite simple. It's in Scrum all the time. So many people miss this. So this simple thing is so fundamental to what we do in Scrum that it's hard to miss. So we're talking about no more non-work to do, completely done. We're not talking about almost done. We're not talking about nearly finished. We're not talking about, as a colleague of mine said a few years ago, I'm nearly 85% done, which is amazing because it's incredibly precise, but incredibly imprecise at the same time. We want to know there's no more known work to do. And that position there is a great position to take our next step from. Now, hopefully, those of you who are old school, this have been doing it for a while, using CI/CD kind of pipeline things if you're in software, so you're getting done a lot, which is just fantastic. But that is not particularly common. And you, as a Scrum Master, you need to be really pushing for this. Your done needs to be, as far as I'm concerned, with your customer. It means that you know exactly where you are. You know what you can do next.
So we've got a question, Lachlan, kind of tied
Sure.
to that. What about quality? How do you know if quality is done with respect, or what is done with respect to quality?
Yeah, that's a tricky question. I think if you mean quality in the sense of it's tested, then you'd say that it's fit for purpose. So you want to align your intentions with how you're going to validate what you've done. That needs to be aligned with defining what done is. There's also internal quality. So it's one thing to find out that your product does what you intended it to do, but it's inside the black box, it's held together with string and sticky tape, which is another problem around professionalism and potentially self-organization, which we're not really touching on, but something worth considering. There's also a nice thing from the patterns community called QAN, which stands for quality without a name, which is where something is fit for purpose, but is really just right. You use it and you go, yeah, that's the thing that I wanted it to be. That's the result that I wanted. And it can be something simple like, I want to print a document, I can connect to the printer and it comes out. I just missed that. It's got, I can't describe the quality with which that's easy. It may not have the internal quality I want, but that's also another way to think about quality. I don't know if that made sense to the person asking the question.
Yeah, we'll see, and they can always ask more.
Yeah.
And I think at the end of the day, all of those quality measures are part of your definition of done. And as you're building out that definition, all those non-functional requirements like performance, that's part of quality. It's also part of your definition of done potentially, in other areas that might be part of the whole product. What does it mean to deliver that to done? And done is done.
Yeah, we're not going to come back in 3 weeks and test security.
Exactly.
So how do we?
He says thanks, so I think you hit it.
Cool. So we're going to, if we're going to build empiricism as a Scrum Master, we can take these 3 reasonably simple ideas to help build it up. So we can focus on transparency, we can focus on inspection and adaptation. If you've done a PSM I course with me, you will know that this is a kind of a mantra that I get us to repeat throughout day 1, and I annoy you with on day 2. It's the nice thing about it is that it's reasonably simple conceptually. The difficult thing about it is that it can be hard to do. So, transparency. Now, years ago, James Copeland said to me, we have no reason to hide anything in Scrum. And it took me a little while to get that into my way of thinking. And this is what he was talking about. We should just be transparent with what we're doing. It lets people inspect it. And now that we are potentially working remotely, for those of us who are working from home and so on, as a Scrum Master, we need to ensure that we are working in a transparent environment. So we need to know, does everyone have access to all the artifacts that they need to have access to work effectively. In Scrum, there's product backlog, there's sprint backlog, there's product increments. That's our starting point. And we need to make sure we're dealing with that. Maybe you've had to move from a physical wall to a virtual wall. It's like a simple example of something you would have to do here. Maybe it's the tool that you've used is limiting. Maybe not everyone has access to it. Worked in environments where things like sprint backlog is in, I've lost the name of it. It's a Microsoft tool that hooks into their IDE, Team something or other, which is great, but it's not fully transparent. There's people who need access to that who don't have access to that if they're not running in that environment. That's an impediment for you. And that's part of understanding what we want to have in empirical working is providing that transparency lets people deal with that usefully. They might go, oh, I don't need it, but probably they may not understand they have an impediment at that stage. You also might have event transparency. So you want to make sure you've got the right people at the events. You want to ensure that everyone knows why they're there, what you're trying to achieve. It's pretty nice in Scrum that the Scrum Guide's what, 14, 15 pages, and we tell you the events and we tell you what we're trying to achieve in the events. And we tell you who should be there. Like it's quite clear. So you shouldn't be turning up to a meeting, go, why are we here? Why have I got this another Zoom meeting in my calendar? So with Scrum, just make sure everyone knows what you're trying to achieve. So it lets things work a lot better. What about inspection? So you want to have the right people at the right time for the right purpose, inspecting what you're doing in Scrum. An example that I've used, working on the bionic eye in Sydney. I don't know if they're still doing it or whether the project got cut. And I was saying, like, you wouldn't hire me to do the inspection on that. I'm not the right person to deal with such an incredibly challenging piece of technology. So even though I understand Scrum and I can coach people on Scrum, I can't usefully inspect the work there. So you've got to have the right people doing the inspection. So we need to make sure this runs effectively as a Scrum Master, so we're getting useful feedback, because our inspection is about understanding where we are and understanding that we're looking at something that's done, it makes sense, it meets what our expectations were, so we can make a decision about what to do next. And again, we want to do this at a useful interval because we want to make some adaptive change. So you don't want to be inspecting stuff every day if it doesn't change that rapidly. So think about that as a Scrum Master. Do I have the right people there? Do they know what they're doing there? Are we getting the right outcomes from this inspection? And adaptation. So we're going to make changes based on what you see. When you inspect something, you may decide that it's varied outside some kind of acceptable limit, and you want to make some changes. But these changes need to be transparent. This is kind of a second loop in the process. No one should be asking, about, has the product backlog changed? Or what are we going to do this sprint to improve stuff? The information needs to be available. We have no reason to hide stuff in Scrum. And the advantage of not hiding stuff is we can get more useful information about it. I also think you should make any adaptation measurable. So you know whether you've had the impact that you want to have it measurable. But I know that I'm also incredibly biased to numbers. That's probably why I became a project manager, because it's fun working with numbers. I'm a quantitative researcher because it's fun playing with numbers. But there are people out there who tell me that not everything can be measured, and I wish they were wrong, but they're not. So I think at the very least, if it's not going to be measured, everything should be reviewed. So you want to know, we intended to do something. Did it do what we thought it would do? Do we feel happier, better, faster, stronger? So think about that as a Scrum Master, and you're working nowadays. Am I focusing on empiricism? Am I focusing on transparency? Am I focusing on inspection? Focusing on adaptation? Let's talk about servant leadership. How's everyone going? Is it just me? Anything in the chat? Anyone saying hi?
I think people are saying hi, people are saying great, people are saying all good. People are telling you what TFS stands for, Team Foundation Server,
Oh, thank you
which
so
of course
much.
has been rebranded again for
Has it? What is
probably
it
the
now?
12th time. It's now Azure DevOps Server.
Okay.
So it's now ADS, so you have to learn a whole new acronym.
Oh man,
But
but too many TLAs.
We need an OKR for the TLA. Oh, anyway.
Okay, so let's talk about servant leadership. I'm an accidental leadership researcher in that I wanted to study teams and teamwork, and I wanted to study self-organizing teams, and I'm doing a PhD at the University of Newcastle. And I ended up falling into this studying leadership instead in teams, and I'm going to touch on a little bit of what I'm talking about, but it's allowed me to dig a bit more into the ideas of what leadership can look like, particularly in the 21st century. And even though servant leadership was first put out there, I think in the early 70s, Robert Greenleaf put it out. It's developed over the years, and I think it's quite a valid way of thinking about leadership. And I would even go, one of my favorite phrases is to describe Scrum as a post-industrial organizational structure. And I like that because I think I can charge people more money when I can say sentences like that. But what I mean by that is that we developed our organizations on the back of the Industrial Revolution, from the cottage industries to the larger factories to what we started doing early 20th century and then through the second half of the 20th century. And over that time, we've become far more educated. So you didn't go into the job that your parents did because that's the only education you would have had. Your parents ran a farm, you learned to run a farm. So now we've got much more general education. And I think because of that, the control structures that come with industrial organization structures are far less relevant. People are entering the workforce with a much higher degree of education, a much greater sense of autonomy. That means that vertical leadership structures, top-down leadership, is far less relevant to the modern organization. That's what I mean. Feel free to use the phrase. You don't have to credit it to me, but it sounds great when you use it because people go, oh, what's that? Or they just turn off and think you're showing off. But yeah, 6 to 1, half a dozen to the other. The Scrum Master's role, we talked about promoting and supporting Scrum. And for the most part, they're going to provide service to the team they're working with, the Scrum team they're in. But they also need to work with the wider organization. It's unusual that a Scrum team is the entire organization. And we would describe the role, the Scrum Master role, as a servant leader role. And often we just drop you that. Yeah, you're a servant leader. That's tricky in itself. What does it mean to be a servant leader? I still think a lot of the way we talk about leadership is this hierarchical, vertical leadership structure with a leader out the front making the magic happen or rallying the troops kind of thing. And that's not how servant leadership works. Not entirely anyway. I just want to cover up a couple of misconceptions. Like I said, I do research in this. So this is from some of the research in the last 10 years on servant leadership. I like this quote just to understand what servant leadership is. So it should be noted that working from a need to serve does not imply an attitude of servility in the sense that power lies within the hands of the followers or that the leaders should have low self-esteem. So as a servant leader, it's not that you're switching around and just being like the humble cliched servant. It just means that your responsibilities change and you're trying to grow the autonomy and responsibility of your followers. You're trying to encourage the people who follow you to think for themselves. And that's, it's a supportive role rather than a directive role. And I think with the complexity that we deal with in modern product development, the complexity we deal with right now with all the changes of our global pandemic, servant leadership is incredibly important. People are working from home. They've probably never worked from home before. Some people will be isolated. How do you help those people out? Some people will be trying to deal with their family all at home at the same time whilst trying to work. You've got to support that. The way you lead in this environment is going to be different to where you would lead if everyone's in the workplace doing their 8 hours or whatever it is. And did I mention that I like numbers? So I like looking at research and that kind of stuff. So there was a 2011 review which estimated that as many as half the top companies in Fortune magazine's best places to work regularly practice servant leadership. There's a company in Texas, TD Industries, I think. They've been using servant leadership since the 70s or 80s as part of their organizational approach. They've been in the best places to work for 20 or 30 years now, and I think that's the crux of it. This is an effective approach to leadership, an important approach. More numbers. Get excited now. So there was a 2019 meta-analysis of servant leadership outcomes. What the hell is that? So you take a whole bunch of individual studies that are done all around the world, and you use this technique called meta-analysis, and you bring all those results together and you make sense of them as if they're one huge study instead of 50 smaller studies. And they found that servant leadership was positively related to a whole bunch of stuff. So follower performance improved in servant leadership environments. So even if you are in a hierarchical environment, working as a servant leader improves the performance of the people who work with you. Follower organizational citizenship behaviors improved. What is that? Usually we refer to it as OCB. So there's another TLA for everyone. Just talk that one up, another one for today. Organizational citizenship behaviors are where people invest their discretionary effort into the workplace, which means that you do stuff that you don't necessarily have to do for work. You do things to make things better in the workplace for yourself and your colleagues and just the workplace in general. It's strongly related to effective performance in organizations. Again, servant leadership related to follower job satisfaction, which just feels like a no-brainer. If you've got someone who's looking out for you and trying to help you out, surely you're going to be more satisfied in your job. It's strongly related to follower commitment and follower trust. Again, it feels like a bit of a no-brainer, but these are really useful things in organizations. We know trust drives team performance. We know commitment drives team performance. Job satisfaction drives team performance. So even outside of the Scrum world, this is an effective approach. I need to have a drink. I got too excited.
So while you're taking that drink, we have a great question that kind of ties into what you're talking about here. So Krishna asks, so servant leadership versus project manager, what's the difference?
I'll give you the consulting answer, and the consulting answer is it depends. I think you have the job of the project manager, but you can behave as a servant leader in that role. And it will depend on the culture of project management where you're operating as a project manager to be a servant leader as a project manager, or you'll be a more directive or authoritarian leader, perhaps, depending on how it's expected to operate and how you choose to operate. I've worked with many organizations that have transitioned from traditional linear serial approaches of project management into Scrum. They've taken project managers and they've rebadged them as Scrum Masters because people think the Scrum Master is a project management role, which it is not. And some people struggle, and I've seen some people just go, this is what I've done mostly anyway, but I'm just dealing with different kinds of project plans. That's the product owner's problem. They deal with the product backlog and stuff, and I help them with that. And for them, the servant leadership thing has been an easy transition because they know as the project manager, the performance of their project is entirely dependent on the people working on it. And the best way to get people to work well is to support them rather than shout at them.
Yeah, VJ makes a good point here. Project management is a title. Servant leadership is a behavior, a way you act, which I think kind of hits one part of the nail on the head. I wrote an article in SD Times not that long ago, I guess, on I'm a project manager. Does that mean I'm going to be a Scrum Master as my team moves to Agile? And the answer is that same answer that I start with that you just gave, Lachlan, which is it depends. Do you have the mentality for it? Do you have the personality for it? Are you an amazing numbers person and spreadsheet jockey, but don't have the personality to be that servant leader and to serve the team and to support the team and to coach the team and do all the things that that Scrum Master needs to do? You may be an amazing project manager that would not be a good Scrum Master because you don't have those others, what I'll call the softer skills. And actually what our PSM II course focuses a lot about are those softer skills of the Scrum Master. How do you deal with the teams? How do you deal with people, and the like? And those are so important to being a servant leader. It's letting the team fail potentially and coaching them through it and helping them through it, where a project manager often would just see that as, oh wait, no, we can't let the team struggle, we can't let the team fail because we're going to miss some date or some number or some metric that we're trying to capture. Or as a servant leader, you may allow that because it's a learning experience for them. It's going to allow them to learn and grow and be better in that long run.
Which,
I was
yeah,
just going to ask
Sarah.
another question just on, you mentioned that the Scrum Master's role is beyond the Scrum team, working into the rest of the organisation. So there's a great question here about how a Scrum Master can influence their leadership teams in their organisation to adopt servant leadership as a culture, I guess, as behaviours. How do you do that if you've got a leadership team that aren't really, I guess, supporting that type of behaviour?
You know, if I had the one best answer for that, then I would be streaming this live from my yacht in the Bahamas. So I've got my bias on how to do that, which is just one way to do it, and I can't guarantee that it works every time. So one of the things I would suggest is modeling the behaviours, and we'll go into one understanding of how servant leadership can work by a man named Laub, and you can show that, and where that starts to bear fruit. Did I mention that I like numbers? You then put those numbers in front of people and go, look at my team that I've been working with and working hard on this servant leadership thing, and notice that they seem to be the most committed team. Maybe they're the team with the lowest turnover. Maybe they're the team that's improved quality. Maybe it's the team which just seems to get on better, least conflict issues or something like that. And I go, well, we're attributing that to Scrum and servant leadership, which is part of Scrum. If that worked every time, I assure you that we'd be having a different conversation right now. Sometimes that doesn't work. Sometimes people don't want to listen. Sometimes you can't be as successful as you want to be. So there's lots of other limiting factors, but that's going to be my first attempt. That's what I'm going to first start doing. Did that answer the question? Or did I do my usual, just keep talking until you give up? I can't see the Q&A list.
Oh, we tell you if you answered it because we mark it as answered.
Okay, cool. Let's look at this is Laub's view on what to do as a servant leader. So he's saying there's 6 things you can be doing. One of them is to value people. Another is to develop people. Another is to build a community. You can display authenticity. You can provide leadership, and you can share leadership. And just a little plug now, if you're interested in number 6, get in touch with me. That's my PhD's on sharing leadership. So how do we value people as a Scrum Master? What do we do? Well, I think it's important that we trust people and we believe in people. The man who taught me Scrum years ago, a man named Jens Ostergaard, who I kept in touch with for a long time, mentored me quite a bit. His one annoying answer to every problem in Scrum was to trust the team. And it probably took me 10 years to get that. But this is what he was saying, is you've got a bunch of professional adults who somehow manage to get up in the morning and clean themselves up and get to work. That doesn't change who they are when they get into it. They're still valuable, useful people. They can look after themselves, they can do stuff. So you want to trust that. A concrete thing that I would say right now, conversations I've had with people in Australia about working from home is there's often a boundary problem between work and home when you're working from home. Work can bleed into home life and that kind of stuff. So I think as a Scrum Master, you should probably keep an eye on that and maybe help people out around that one, potential impediment. Oh, look, little call outs, it's exciting. What about developing people? That's another thing we can do. And Eric mentioned this earlier, just a couple of minutes ago. One of the ways you can help people develop and teams develop is let them fail. It's trite that some people say failing is the first attempt in learning, but it is. Development opportunities come from making mistakes and learning what those are. But you also want to look for opportunities for people to develop and encourage people to develop. I'd also say you want to focus on people's strengths rather than weaknesses. So tell people what they're good at and reinforce that, encourage that is a great way for people to develop. I could bang on about the strengths research, but I won't. But it's just to say focusing on strengths just works really well. Encourage and affirm people. Another thing you can do. So what about building community? As a Scrum Master, you want to build relationships with the team, and you want to build relationships across the team. It's not, you don't want to make yourself the hub of the team and all the relationships are coming into you. You want to pollinate what's going on between people in the team. You want to collaborate with people, you want to value the differences that you have in the team and across the team. And some of the interesting research on positive organizations seems to indicate that you need to go beyond just a workplace unit as well. So don't think of people just as employees. Acknowledge that they have connections that are broader than that. I think the whole working from home thing has really driven that home for people who, let's see, I ran a course a few months ago, and one of the people in Melbourne had a new baby. So he wasn't just person on course, he was new father as well. So we had different connections with that. And I think it's worthwhile building that into your understanding of what your team's doing and who those people are. So valuing this, building relationships. Display authenticity. It may seem pretty obvious, but as a servant leader, you need to be who you are. As a Scrum Master, you need to be somewhat consistent. You need to not put I'm Scrum Master now, so I'm going to behave like this, and I'm no longer Scrum Master, so I'm going to behave like that. Be who you are and work with that. I would also say that it's worthwhile acknowledging faults, failings, working out how to learn from others. Just as developing people, I said, you can give them the chance to fail and they'll learn. It's the same thing with being authentic. Accepting that in yourself is an opportunity to learn as well. Providing leadership, there's so much you can do in leadership which is not necessarily directive. Generally, we just define leadership as a positive influence on a team rather than anything particularly detailed. There are ways to think about leadership which are more detailed. Something like transformational leadership will give you a whole bunch of things you need to do. But one of the most important things that's kind of popped up, certainly this century in leadership, is you help provide or you help support meaning making. So things that happen and you help people make sense of that and make meaning out of that as a leader. As well as normal kind of stuff, creating alignment, making sure the shared identity is strong, making sure that the organization is just and that kind of stuff. Those kind of things in leadership pretty consistent. But I think as a Scrum Master, helping people understand what's going on, helping people understand, develop empathy for what's going on outside their team, within their team, is a whole lot of leadership you can provide them. And finally, sharing leadership. Honestly, this I could give you a whole talk on that, and if you want to, I'm doing one for Agile Australia soon. Little plug there. So sharing leadership is where leadership moves between different members of the team, and this is really important, because acknowledging that you don't have all the answers and you don't have all the leadership is fundamental to making your team work and service you can provide to the team and the organization. So allowing other people to influence the team, encouraging other people to influence the team is incredibly important and very, it's great for team performance and innovation. One of the ways you can do that is to provide voice. So voice means that you allow people's ideas to get out there and be received by others. It's something, we do quite a lot of this in PSM II. We do a lot of liberating structures. And I think one of the most useful things about liberating structures is that they allow people's voice to come out, no matter what their preference, the way they prefer to deal with it. So if you've got someone like me who's more than willing to talk, that can be a problem if you've got someone else who is not. But liberating structures provide nice ways to get the ideas of the quieter people out there, because they can be just as valuable as someone who just craps on for ages. So you've got to look at ways to do that as a Scrum Master and servant leader. Let's use shared power, and the power is really just the influence. It's not the hire and fire power. It's the ability to direct the team and the team's effort. So these are the 6 domains that Lab identifies as working as a servant leader. Other people have slightly different models. Most of this is pretty consistent. I like this. It's nice and simple to remember. If there's anything more than 6, I'm just going to forget it. And that's what we wanted to cover with you briefly. So we looked at 2 things you can work at as a Scrum Master. So there's empiricism and there's servant leadership. We delve into these more in the PSM II course. And you may have been wondering where the techniques are right now. Where's the list of things that I can do tomorrow as the Scrum Master, because that's what I need. Where's my new tool? And this is another thing with the PSM II course. It's not a toolbox course. The way you're going to work with these 2 principles in your context is going to be different to how I would work in mine. And we look at ways for you to develop that, rather than just go, well, it's day 2 of the sprint, so you should be doing this, 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 and this. You know, open the Scrum Guide at page 742, look at the 2nd paragraph, and that's what you should say. No, what we're looking at is how do you work from these principles to improve what's going on with Scrum and to improve what's going on with your organization and your teams. So, as I said, we're trying to introduce you a little bit into what's happening in PSM II. It's an advanced Scrum Master class. I've done a fair bit of training. I've developed training as well, and I can honestly say PSM II is a very different class to anything I've been on before or have developed. So we look at tool, skills, stances to be an effective Scrum Master and not so effective. What are our principles and values to help us guide us being effective Scrum Master? How do you act as a servant leader? How do you support your development team, the product owner, and the organization? How do you create a useful environment to be usefully working with Scrum and the Scrum framework? I was talking to Eric about this a few weeks ago. The number of people who say that they get something out of the course within a short period of time is I can't remember what the percentage was, but it was very high. Which said to me that there are very smart people doing this course, because I think it took me 3 or 4 months before I really understood the course, and now I train it. It's a very interesting course, and it's challenging in the sense of it makes you really think deeply about what you're going to do. And we spend a fair bit of time on the items of the course. We'll dig into them and make sure we can really engage with the content.
And this course is purely very little slides. It's really all about doing and learning while doing, and activities, and learning a lot of those liberating structures that Lachlan talked about. And I talk about it as you're learning the soft skills of the Scrum Master. You're learning how to be a Scrum Master. You're not learning Scrum. We don't teach you Scrum in that class. As a matter of fact, we expect you to come with Scrum experience. We really focus on teaching you how to be a good Scrum Master. So I think we're about at time. You want to hit the next slide?
Yeah.
And I threw a link in the chat to everybody as well for this, to register for this course that's coming up. It's coming up out of Melbourne. It's Australian time, October 26th through the 29th. It's being run live virtually by Lachlan and the Elaborate team. So you can learn a whole lot more and a lot of facilitation techniques and other things in that course. Lachlan?
Yeah, I don't guarantee it, but there's probably going to be a lot of dad jokes as well.
I keep my dad joke book on my desk that my children got me, so it's always here.
It's always there. I've got it on my backbone. Thanks for coming along today. I think there's a few other questions in the chat, and this is the content. So we'll probably wrap it up there from that point of view. I can see what's in the chat and see how we can go about helping you answer that quickly. But if you need to sign off.
There are a couple. I think you've hit on a lot of it already. The first one was, I think you've kind of talked about throughout, transitioning from office to work from home.
Yep.
Are there factors that a Scrum Master needs? The next one, if a single team member, so this is really a Scrum question, if a single team member violates the trust that you have given them, is the Scrum Master's responsibility to float up the behavior issue. Do you have any recommendations, suggestions? I know we've had this conversation a lot on the PST, on our trainer port channel quite a bit. Any thoughts?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. And again, I'm just going to plug the course, as we do cover team conflict in the PSM II course. So let's just put that out there, Dan. Float up the behavioral issue. I assume what you're doing is you're suggesting that you talk to someone else in the organization about the behavioral issue. I think it's going to depend on the extent of the trust violation, whether you need to involve someone outside the team. I think it's good to acknowledge as a Scrum Master, you know your limitations. So there'll be times you will need to get some help dealing with behavioral issues. There are certain behavioral issues that definitely need to talk to somebody else about because they might have legal implications. So you'll need to bring someone in that way and bring a mediator in. But I think it's worthwhile being transparent with the person. You don't want to surprise them and go, "Hi, this is Simo from HR. We're going to have a bit of a chat about what you said at the Daily Scrum yesterday." So be transparent about it, be respectful of them, know your limitations is what I would be thinking.
And I think I think you hit part of it around, it depends on what is that issue. Is this something that the team can resolve? And we can work together with the team, or the team themselves is an issue on the team and development team members not getting along, in which case, let's see if we can help coach them to resolving it. Is an issue of something egregious that we need to get HR involved, or can we handle it ourselves? Is it something we can handle in a retrospective? But I think one of the most important things that you said is let's bring it up, right? Let's bring up that issue and let's have that discussion. Let's not let it fester.
Do you have any suggestions on what we can do to help others as servant leaders to make it more tangible? People with specialist positions outside the Scrum team, such as principal engineer and architect, etc., etc. Again, I would suggest the modeling side of things to make it more tangible. There are elements in Laub's approach to the servant leadership that are nice in the sense that they're outside of the Scrum Master, and you can pick some of those out and start to use those. It's a tricky one. It depends on what you've got for leadership development in your organization as well, whether you try to influence that as an approach to what you could do for leadership within the organization.
Also, can you get them on the Scrum team? There's no reason to have an engineer or an architect outside of the Scrum team. Is it possible to get them into the Scrum team so they're actually experiencing it and acting as a part of the team? We should be architecting throughout, and we should be building architecture and developing that architecture and testing that architecture and validating it and going forward and forward and forward. Are there opportunities maybe to get them more as part of the team so they don't feel like they're kind of sitting out there on their own, or they sometimes when they're sitting out there on their own as that principal architect or senior architect or whatever, and they're not part of the Scrum team, they kind of feel above the team, and that could cause problems from a servant leadership perspective versus bringing them into the team and having them actually be a part of an experience, a part of a team, and making them more peers versus whatever you'd want to call them up above.
Well, I think it's what Simon's put a little bit more context, saying these are multiple teams and they have siloed skills. So I think that's what you're saying, Eric. Bring them into the Scrum teams, create teams that can deliver full product increments without having to go to these siloed teams as a kind of a component or specialization team.
Okay.
I think we'll just look at one more thing before we sign off. And so, Elvin, how do you get Scrum to work in a country or environment where it is not popular or known? And it gave me a flashback to the early noughties in Australia, where trying to do this thing called Scrum, and people are like, "What? Are you going to play rugby at work?" So, from my experience, Elvin, was I left several jobs to find an environment where I could actually run a Scrum team and make it work. I'm not suggesting that in the current situation that you quit your job to try and find a job where you're doing Scrum. But that is one thing that I did do. One thing I did in an environment in Australia where we were told that we're not doing Scrum because they did Scrum and it was awful. And they didn't do Scrum. What they did is they said, we don't want to talk to anyone anymore, so we're calling this Scrum so we don't have to have any feedback. So what we did is we implemented Scrum and gave it a different name. We said, well, we're going to be using a very open approach, which has lots of feedback and collaboration, and we're going to deliver you your product in short cycles, and it's going to be really good and high quality, and all the stuff that we talk about without ever saying Scrum. And then when we got that working and people said, gee, that's really good, we said, actually, it's Scrum. We lied to you, and we're sorry that we lied to you. But we knew if we said it was Scrum, you'd say no. But now, look, it's good, isn't it? So we did a bit of I do feel somewhat guilty that I did it. I knew it would work.
Talking to Ken Schwaber, he's done that many times, similar things. Well, let's just go do it, and then we'll prove it, prove that we were successful. Or in some instances, we've got a video where Ken talks about one of his first projects, I believe it was at Fidelity, where he said, okay, just give me a team for 30 days. And that's where the software in 30 days book kind of came out of. So give me a team for 30 days, just fund it for 30 days. How much is that going to cost? We're going to deliver something, because you've been wasting a lot of time and money for 6+ months trying to deliver something. You haven't delivered anything. Give me a team, give me 30 days. We'll deliver something that at least is demonstrable that we can start getting feedback on. And that's how we started to prove it at Fidelity. That was one of his first Scrum projects. They didn't call it Scrum. He just give me a team. We'll go deliver. Then they showed how they delivered it.
I think we'll sign off there.
Yeah.
Thank you to everyone for coming along. Thanks, Eric, for helping out.
I'd just like to say as well on behalf of Elaborate and Academy, thank you, Eric, for making this time to come and talk to us. It's very dark over there. And thank you, Lachlan, for giving us your valuable time and speaking on this really important topic.
Sure. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks to everyone else. I'm really glad to see so many people got so much out of it. Excellent.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.